Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. Each month, we usually meet on the third Tuesdays to celebrate the spoken word together as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. However, today, as a special treat for National Poetry Month, we are gathering a bit earlier than usual, which is fantastic because it means we get to see each other sooner. And I want to let our newer attendees know that these gatherings are always special. Every month is Poetry Month here. And as we come together, we celebrate featured guests and an open mic, inviting readers of all ages, celebrating diverse voices and their stories. And before the pandemic, we used to gather for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library. But since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space. And I'm really grateful this allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe, quite literally. And as ever, I'm so thrilled to see familiar faces as well as a few new ones brightening up this room. I'm really grateful that you decided to take the time to be with us and to be in celebration of poetry today. Happy National Poetry Month to all of you on that note. And thank you so much for being here and zooming in. Most of you are familiar with our Poetry Night tradition. As we come together, please take a moment to share in the chat where you're joining me from. It always amazes me to find people joining us from so many different cities and states, or even different countries like India or Canada. The perks of being virtual, I'll say. So please go ahead and put it in the chat. And let's move on. Can a poem change the world? Former US Poet Laureate Juan Felipe Herrera was once asked this very question, and his response was very powerful. And I'll quote him: "Our lives influence everything. It's not just the work. It's not just the words. It's our entire lives. How we dedicate our life, how we write our life on the pages of time. And in that time, we write, we sing, we dance, we speak, we meditate, we pray, we draw, we have a barbecue, we watch television." So the answer is everything affects everything. And yes, indeed, a poem can bring about radical change. And he goes on to say how when you dedicate time to poetry, in that minute you are reading, maybe someone is listening too. And perhaps in that very minute, we are both changing. And perhaps that is the change we are seeking, which is personal, intimate, and momentary. Small moments, he says. Isn't that beautiful? Well, that's the kind of intentionality I hope to bring to tonight's special gathering, curated in celebration of National Poetry Month. And we are here to honor these small moments, the ones we have each experienced, brought to life through a poem or in those few lines that perhaps connected or stayed and stirred something in us. Moments that have carried tenderness, ferocity, power, and pain all at once. So let me welcome you all once again with this Ars Poetica by Juan Felipe Herrera. The poem is titled, "Let Me Tell You What a Poem Brings," for Charles Fishman. Before you go further, let me tell you what a poem brings. First, you must know the secret. There is no poem to speak of. It is a way to attain a life without boundaries. Yes, it is that easy. A poem. Imagine me telling you this. instead of going day by day against the razors, well, the judgments, all the TikTok bronze, a leather jacket sizing you up, the fashion mall, for example. From the outside, you think you are being entertained. When you enter, things change. You get caught by surprise. Your mouth goes sour. You get thirsty. Your legs grow cold, standing still in the middle of a storm. A poem, of course, is always open for business too. Except, as you can see, it isn't exactly business that pulls your spirit into the alarming waters. There you can bathe, you can play, you can even join in on the gossip. The mist, that is, the mist becomes central to your existence. Thank you. Through his words, Herrera shows us that a poem can be a transformative space, one that shifts us out of our routines and into a realm of personal discovery. And it's not about entertainment or escape, but about finding freedom in the unexpected, in the rawness, and in the connections that emerge from the language itself. About Juan Felipe Herrera, the first Latino poet to serve as California's Poet Laureate from 2012 to 2014, and later as the Library of Congress's Poet Laureate Consultant in Poetry from 2015 to 2017. He has left an indelible mark with his profound and contemplative poems. And I often find myself returning to his work, reflecting on how he describes poetry as something that can knock on our doors and give us a bowl of kindness. I love those words, how he puts it. And with that spirit of generosity and insight, it's both my pleasure and privilege to welcome the current California Poet Laureate, Lee Herrick, and to be in conversation with him as our featured guest tonight. A poet whose work, much like Herrera's, resonates deeply across cultures and communities and brings a profound sense of care, justice, and connection. Before you hear from Lee, let me take a moment to share a bit about his remarkable journey. Lee Herrick is the California Poet Laureate, author of 4 books of poems in praise of late wonder, new and selected poems, Scar and Flower, finalist for the 2020 Northern California Book Award, Gardening Secrets of the Dead, and This Many Miles from Desire. Herrick serves on the advisory board of Terrain.org and 16 Rivers Press. He co-founded Lit Hop in Fresno. He has taught in Qingdao, China, and for Kundiman. He served as Fresno Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2017 and teaches at Fresno City College and in the low residency MFA program at University of Nevada, Reno at Lake Tahoe. Born in Daejeon, Korea, and adopted as an infant, he lives with his family in Fresno, California. He is the 10th California Poet Laureate and the first Asian American to serve in the role. Everyone, let's give a warm welcome to Lee Herrick. Such an honor to have you with us, Lee.
Oh, thank you so much, Monica. Thank you for having me. I was listening to you just talk about the community, about poetry, and the beautiful words and the beautiful reading of Juan Felipe Herrera's. I'm already moved. I feel like you're doing such incredible work there. And so
Thank you.
thank you. I think they're lucky to have you as the poet laureate. So I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank
Thank
you, Lee.
you.
So kind of you. If you'd like to just dive right into a piece or tell us something about whatever you'd like, please go
hmm
ahead.
Sure, sure. So I know that there will be time, I think, for some questions later, and I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you, Monica. Um,
Me too. Me too.
the poem I'll read, I'll just briefly introduce by saying that, as Monica mentioned, I was born in South Korea and adopted when I was about 10 months old. And a good portion of my latest book, called In Praise of Late Wonder, is comprised of prose poems about my adoption. So I'm going to read one of those. So this is titled Home. Home is the space around your heart, like a moat. So the space in your heart or your spirit can have room to breathe, to be and become more of who you are. We know at a young age what hurts: rocks, names, being ignored. And over time, some remain and some change, as home might. But we must protect our home, our identities, what we know to be most true. Within that, there's a lot of space, in my home at least, for discovery or risk or safe argument. And one could say that's a class or economic luxury, and they'd be right. But I'd say space is always important. Space in your heart, room in your mind. When I say I might have missed my birth mother and father every day of my life, I mean that as a person of color, raised in a white family, I was constantly and acutely aware of physical difference and what that could mean. Along with home and country and family and language, as a child, I was separated from the right to grieve. Adoption as a one-dimensional, one-way avenue toward gratitude and fortune is illogical and harmful. I recently read a book by a noted novelist whose father died when she was in her 50s, and she was understandably grieving. She said, "How do I continue with such an absence?" I thought, here is the adopted person's situation from infancy. This loss, this massive absence is thrust upon them from the moment of separation. I call it an inverted grief thrust upon the adoptee. Home is where you are understood or loved or able to be weird, strange, confused, your lost self, your full human self. Mostly, I felt at home. Sometimes I felt so alone, I could almost vanish. So, uh, I've started thinking a lot about joy as a concept, as an emotion, as a reaction, as a situation. And I've started to see it intricately intertwined with struggle or sadness. And so I don't mean to bring it down, but I want to read a short little prose poem titled Sadness, and then I'll try to shift a little bit. But we're all poets here, so hopefully we can handle a little sadness. Um, okay, so sadness. My sadness began on the day I was born. I don't say this to be melodramatic, but it's true. Or what might be more true is that I inherited my first mother's and father's sadnesses, which must be serious since neither has met me, or they died before they met me, or maybe my first father doesn't know I exist. They must be regularly sad, vacant, or dreaming. What do you call a sadness you embody but do not know you embody? Sadness felt like something else when I was living it. Anxiety, fear, paralysis. These were the manifestations, but sadness and loss were the foundation. It can also look like something different, good grades, world travel. But if I were to describe it in its purest form, mine was like staring into a dark blue, almost black night, full of muted stars I couldn't name. Somehow, though, and it probably has a lot to do with poetry and music, I came out the other side with a joy that no person or thing can ever take away. Mm,
Those were beautiful pieces, Lee. What a
mm,
beautifully intimate way to enter into our conversation for tonight and this reading. Thank you so much for beginning with those pieces. And I think certainly much of your work speaks to this emotion that reflects in these pieces. And we'll come to poems that speak to loss and grief, and these poems that hold silence and sorrow and memory with such tenderness. I'd love to talk about that as well. But to begin with, uh, I think one of the lines sums up what I would like to start our conversation with is the line that you just read, a lot to do about poetry and music. And since we are gathered in celebration of National Poetry Month, I wanted to begin with something that speaks to the unexpected and personal ways poetry finds us. And I came across one of your interviews, uh, and in that a detail that really stood out to me. Not many people may know this, that your earliest experiences with writing came through music. And
mhm,
you mentioned writing rap lyrics in middle school and
mm,
turning to music as a refuge when you were
mm,
struggling with mental health as a teenager and as a young adult. And I've always felt that poetry has interesting ways of entering our lives, often very quietly and often through other art forms. And for you, it seems music opened that door.
mm,
So if you could talk about how that early connection evolved into a relationship with poetry and how it continues to shape your creative practice.
mm. Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I love how you phrased that, the unexpected ways poetry enters our lives. You know, we use that term to describe something in some other field as particularly artful or surprising or beautiful,
Mm,
right? Oh, that's poetry in motion, and they might be talking about a dancer or a
right.
film or some other thing. Uh, for me, I've always been moved viscerally, and I think literally by sound. So
Mm,
even before talking about music in some traditional forms, you know, I would always love the sound of the wind, just the
mm,
music of the natural world, how wind sounds different moving through a tall tree versus um, a small row of hedges. The
mm,
sound of water, I love the music of
mm,
water. It could be a small trickle in a creek or something really massive and expansive, like a large lake or certainly an ocean. Um, so when I probably was in middle school, I was a real, I mean, I was playing a lot of soccer and video games, and reading, but I just loved listening to music. This was
mm.
before, of course, the internet. So it was really
Right.
before CDs. So I would listen to the radio all day sometimes and try to write down all the lyrics that I thought they were saying.
Yeah.
Um, and so in high school, when some of the anger was starting to manifest in my life,
Mm,
um, which now I fully can see was related to my adoption. A
Mm,
lot of confusion and anger. So I was acting out or I was having a hard time in school. Music was everything to me.
mm,
And there were really two genres of music that spoke to me at that time. One was punk. It just had this
mm.
visceral kind of energy, and the other was rap. And with rap, there was also a cultural element, but
Right.
specifically for me, it was the feeling of otherness that I connected with, the
Mm,
feeling of wanting more, but not knowing how, or not having access, or even being kept from those
mm.
things, whether they're opportunities, our cultural histories, family, you name it.
Right.
And so thematically, the music was interesting to me. And then just the lyricism,
Mm,
I mean, I wasn't really interested in too much of the misogyny and things like that, but rap is not the only genre that has violence or misogyny. So without getting too political, I do think a lot of times the criticism just falls on certain groups of people. But I loved the lyricism, the wordplay, the invention. Um, and then from there, I started to discover poets and study it more as a craft. But music was always very important to me, and it remains important for me.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And does it still guide you in your creative practice? Even now, do you intentionally bring it into your practice, or it just naturally occurs?
Well, I don't listen to too much rap anymore or punk. Um, and I was going to say something about my age, but I don't think that's the reason. I think folks my age can still listen to rap and punk. But I might listen to something a little bit more mellow, something acoustic or folk music, things like that. But sound is a major part of my thinking and my writing and my poetics. It's the first thing I think of with a poem. It might even precede the image, is just
Mm,
the sound. So, for example, in the poem that we'll take a look at later, it's called How Music Stays in the Body.
yeah,
There's just a lot of things I'm doing in that poem where I'm trying to achieve some sound. Um,
right.
I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar,
Yeah.
and things like that. So music and sound are still important to me. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful, Ali. And yes, as you were talking about it, I could, having read some of your work, I feel that that sound really comes through in your pieces, and even in the cadence of your voice as you deliver those pieces as well, the way you're reading them. And we'd love to hear more from you before we have another question. So
Hmm.
please take that time.
Sure. Thank you. Maybe I'll read a poem that started when I was thinking about sound and
Hmm.
sounds that I no longer hear or that I miss. I think we all miss someone's voice, or
Mm,
we remember something that is no longer part of our lives. So this is a poem. It's a couple of sonnets titled "Partial Crown in Praise of Absent Sounds." I want the fax machine, the dot matrix buzzsaw of news across the wire, the young woman's lisp and fire during solo moonlight road trips, the shuffle of predictable card tricks, the acoustic chord like sweet desire, the rotary dial and pronunciation error. When I say absent sounds, I mean typewriter key, as much as anio or ye, the 8-track plunk, as much as Korean vowels drawn out at the end like a plain blue sky. I want to know the way home. There's not much more I need. Home. There's not much more I need, except to know how much blue sky there is from here to you. Why I sometimes hear your voice, freed, wild, true. Please, take the lead. At times, I thought I was going to die. At times, fire. At other times, firefly. My daughter was 4 at the art gallery and called it the art galaxy. A malapropism I wish existed. Star, sonnet, serenade. I want the mispronunciation, broken rhythm, and scratched record. Survivor wisdom. A mother's prayer for her son who stayed perfectly still when she left and kissed him. Maybe maybe I'll read one more along this thread here. Um, this is another sonnet, and it's the title poem from the book, In Praise of Late Wonder. I've wondered what my Korean mother's voice sounded like when I was born. Was it gasp, hiss, or flag in light wind? I've wondered if she kissed me before I became a wind, a white noise and blue sky. I've wondered lately about joy, butterfly, hummingbird, angels so full of bliss they almost sing. I imagine some of this relates to the orphan I was, the adopted boys and girls like me, all diaspora and alarm. I've wondered if I'm made of smoke and fire, sometimes clear sky, sometimes quiet storm. I've wondered lately how the acoustic guitar keeps its secrets, makes me float a little higher. How could I not love looking at the stars?
Such spectacular pieces there, Lee. Thank you so much again for bringing those in. And I think just listening to them, you can feel the richness in those pieces. And especially one of the things I really admire about your work is the specificity and the vividness of the imagery. And with imagery, I think it's not about singular image, but it's like what precedes or what follows the imagery, whether it's cultural and diasporic imagery or nature and food imagery. And uh, the specificity brings such emotional depth to your pieces. Uh, as we heard in these pieces, where you said, my daughter was 4 at the gallery. You're being very specific with certain things. And I think that, generalizations could really remove the reader far off from the poem, but being specific helps the reader to engage with your work. Even in the sonnet, the title poem that you read, I love immediately as you enter the poem, you say, I've wondered if my Korean mother's voice sounded like when I was born. Or you've said, I wonder if I'm made from smoke and fire. There, the imagery hits us again. And, or the acoustic guitar that you bring in, telling us about the sound or music that is always carried through in your pieces. And my question to you is, how do you study craft? And what do you do to study poetry yourself?
Mm. Well, great question, and thank you for the comments about the imagery. Um, with craft, I think that mm, I'll try to liken it to music, and this is only a guess, but my guess is that musicians or a vocalist,
Mm,
he or she or they will have things in that music that they love to do. You know, a signature sound. I mean, if you listen to Jimi Hendrix, you know, his guitar playing is pretty identifiable, or a vocalist whose voice we can recognize. And so with craft and poetry, there are just some things I love to do.
mm,
Um, you know, even when I'm working with an image, I'm still using what is called anaphora, like
Mm.
repetition. And that comes from music, now that I think about it, but a lot of repetition along with the image. So uh, sometimes clear sky, sometimes quiet storm. So I'm interested in that element of craft. I love tightening and um, revision and playing with the
Mm.
words and things. So um, there's a poetry craft technique called a syndeton, which is just a fancy word for listing three things without the conjunction. So instead of milk,
Mm.
eggs, and butter, and we can hear these examples throughout literature. Caesar famously said, Veni, vidi, vici. I
Mm.
came, I saw, I conquered, or that novel,
Mm.
Eat, Pray, Love. So I
Mm.
love tightening the language, and surprise is something I strive for in myself. I could say, I think a lot about my birth mother, you
Mm.
know, but a lot of times, and I'll only offer this up because you're asking me and I'm a guest. I'm trying not to pretend like I'm poet of the week here, that I've got some secret to the poems, but I do get asked a lot, right? How can I develop my voice? Or a poet says, how can I write a
Mm.
poem that has this emotional resonance? And when I started, I remember thinking, well, I have to make it general
Mm.
so that people can relate to it. But what we find usually is that it's often the inverse,
Mm.
that it is the specificity.
Mm.
Um, it is the things that only you uniquely have lived and can write that will, I think, separate the poems and elevate them.
Mm.
I mean, some of the most deeply moving things I've ever read were not written by men or Asian Americans. Some were,
Mm.
but it's because that writer has been able to write with such specificity and authenticity.
Mm.
And then what we find is that those things are universal. Missing people, hoping for good things like that.
Beautifully put, Lee. We are also privileged here to hear all these beautiful, wise teachings and learnings that we are gaining from as you talk to us about the poetry techniques and the little things that work or do not work. And I really appreciate you sharing those. And poem of the week or not, but you are a king poet, I'll say. And I always believe that each featured poet, the way they engage with our audience and the way they engage with their work and talk about it, if you're listening to them deeply, it can be a true masterclass in itself. And I'm really glad that through these poetry nights, we can hear poets like you bringing those gems to us. So thank you so much for
Mm,
sharing those.
mm. Absolutely. And you're reminding me, just briefly to speak to the second part of your question.
Mhm.
I'm continuing to learn always. And this is often how I do, is just listening to poets and reading their work. So, yeah.
Thank you, Lee. You're certainly a very kind listener. I can feel that in your presence, even if we are virtual. So I'm really grateful for that. And I think I certainly have a question following through with other things, but would love to hear another set of poems from you before we go on with that.
Sure. So I think I'll read um, one poem and then a prose-like poem. And yeah, I don't think this needs a lot of explanation. Um, and this is titled Acclamation. My first language was the ocean. It sounded like my first mother's body, wave, storm, vanish. I love what wind does to the trees. I want nature to move me like that. My name is a song. In it, there are horses, fed by a man who says, I feel American when I kill a row of ants and say they asked for it. We are this many miles from desire. We are immigrant turned imperialist. I love what wind does to the bay. Wave to me, smile at me, like you know my name, like you love the ocean too, or at least the way I glisten in the moonlight. And let's see, I'll read one more. This is the last poem in the first longer section about these prose poems. So this is another adoption related poem. Yeah. So this is titled Stars. Every now and then, I remember that I was born on the other side of the earth, and it makes sense that I love looking up at the stars. It's such a childish thing to do, like climbing trees, stomping in puddles. But there's some strange pull and simple satisfaction from looking at the stars after all these years. I wonder if a man my age in Korea has the same love. I wonder how the stars relate to a gravitational likelihood that I'll tell my daughter someday about the time in our backyard, swimming in the moonlight, and the world seemed perfect. Or the time I dropped her off at her middle school in Fresno, and before I drove off, she motioned for me to stop and fogged up the window with her breath and wrote with her finger, I love you, Dad, with a heart, and the world seemed perfect. That's what it is about the stars. Because they are so many millions of miles away and so still, the immediate chaos or confusion of our lives seems so minor. Even in the daylight, they're right there, imperceptible, but there. Something like faith or belief or the wild idea that a deep kind of joy is there for you, even if you have no idea where it is.
Thank you, Lee. Such beautifully woven pieces there. I love the visual of writing in the fog on the window. What a beautiful thought as well. And I love how all of these poems about loss and such heavy grief, they are really buoyant in joy and so much lightness. And that brings me to this question of I have, and I'll just share a few quotes from other poets that I came across. To begin with, Victoria Chang, the poet, once said that grief is our national language, while Brooklyn poet Seth Leeper explores the idea that poetry can serve as a vehicle for resurrecting our own litanies of loss. And in this context, I like how you reflected on this when you said in an interview once that anytime you are thinking about grief and suffering, you are thinking of it from a whole range, whether it's generations or known and unknown family, and the people we long for. And we see that much of your work takes a deep dive into these themes of loss and identity and belonging, especially in the context of adoption. How do you approach writing about grief in such a multifaceted way, one that encompasses both personal and generational loss while navigating the complex terrain of identity and belonging?
Mm, boy, it's another wonderful question, Monica. I think I can only certainly speak from my experience with loss and my experience as a poet. So um, I suppose folks could take this with a grain of salt, but I've, I guess the old adage is that it comes in waves, but for me, it didn't really happen at all consciously until I was in my 30s. And then it was a
Mm,
flood, you know. Maybe before then, it was a lot of denial, you know. Um, a lot of adoptees, especially if we're adopted into white families, especially in the 70s, when the language was, oh, we don't see color, or you're lucky to be adopted.
mm,
Perhaps, but that also just dismisses and sort of blunts
mm,
the loss. And so, um, with writing, what I can offer is I think we're not ready for certain things at certain times. I think this is why, you know, I think most anybody at any age could learn how to write a sonnet or a poem or some form poem if they just learn the structure, right? Here's where the
mm,
words need to rhyme. This is the rhyme pattern. But that's very different than writing something with some emotional resonance. And that usually comes with age or
mm,
a reckoning or um, some coming to terms with oneself and almost a readiness that I have to write
mm,
this. You know, the great Audre Lorde said in a 1977 MLA speech in Chicago, the great phrase, your silence will not protect you. And that's the
mm,
speech in which she says, there are some things that we try to keep in that just, these weren't her words, but that just eat away at us. She called it a tyranny, you know, against
mm,
ourselves. And poetry can be the antidote to that grief or
yeah,
loss or uncertainty. Um, one thing I'll add to that is
mm,
we don't have to have all the answers to write about it. I always tell my students it's creative writing. We can
mm,
invent,
mm,
you know, and we can recreate ourselves or find joy through that difficulty. Um, so, you know, so I'm thinking about the language, I'm thinking about the image, but with generations and things like that, I'm also mindful that my existence or my sense of loss is not only my own. There's somebody out there, like in the poem, I don't know if my first father knows I exist, technically. He may, but there's one person who definitely knows I exist, and that was my first mother, my birth mother. And
mm,
she has probably got some emotional range there as well. I don't know what it is. So I think that kind of thinking about other people, imagining their lives, honoring their difficulties and joys, um, is sort of where the poem can give us a lot of freedom, you know.
mm, mm,
Um, and I, you know, I'll just lastly say everything I write, and I don't think everything most people write is first and foremost about grief and loss.
mm,
Some poems are lighter, you know, but what's great sometimes is it goes back to something you said very wisely at the beginning, how these unexpected surprises come in.
yeah,
I was trying to write a poem about sound, partial crown in praise of absent sounds, a fax
mm,
machine, a rotary dial. But the last line of the poem, a mother's prayer for her son
mm.
before she left and kissed him. So when those things make their way or they want their way into the poem, sometimes I just let them make their way into the poem.
Which I'm so grateful for, Lee. They're such moving poems, and I think the larger the grief, the more room for joy as well and light as well. And you bring that light in, and you really pick up that strand and offer that strand of light to all of us when we are listening as a reader or as a as a listener. And I'm so grateful for that beautiful reminder you shared, and that you share as a teacher with your students, that we can create and invent things. So I love how you beautifully weave in both of these complexities together and really bring it as a whole, those little parts, and make it so wholesome and nourishing. So thank you so much for those, Lee. And I certainly have a couple of questions which are addressing your role as the State Poet Laureate, as well as your role as a teacher. But before those questions, we'd love to hear a few more poems. So
Mm,
please go ahead.
sure, sure. And should I also read, or should I not read How Music Stays in the Body?
I think if you can hold on to that, Lee, for
Okay,
the end, that'll be perfect,
okay,
if you
okay,
don't mind. Thank you.
sure. I'll read an older one. So I know that many of you, maybe all of you, write, which I'm thinking you probably read. And I don't know if any of you did crossword puzzles or word games. Um, I used to love crossword puzzles. I could never finish them. I loved them. Uh, so this poem started when I was on a plane some years ago, and I started to do the crossword puzzle that was in the magazine in the seat in front of me. Do you remember? Um, and a couple people had already started the crossword puzzle, um, but I just jumped in and tried to finish it. And then the poem came out of that. So this is called Flight. The in-flight magazine crossword partially done, a corner begun here, scratched out answers there, one set of answers in pencil, another in the green. The woman with the green ballpoint knew the all-time hit king is Rose, and the Siem Reap treasure is Angkor Wat. And the woman, perhaps en route to hold her dying mother's hand in Seattle, forgot about death for 10 minutes while remembering her husband's Cincinnati Reds hat while gardening after the diagnosis. Her handwriting was so clean. Maybe she was a surgeon, maybe a painter. No, what painter wouldn't know 17 down? Diego's love, 5 letters. In a rush, her dying mother's voice came back to her. Or maybe she was a Chinese adoptee, and her first mother's imagined voice said, Wo ai ni. At 30,000 feet, you focus on 33 across. Asian American classic. The woman. When a stranger in the window seat sees the clue, watches me write in W, and she says, warrior. And for a moment, you forget it is your favorite memoir, and she reminds you of lilies or roses, Van Gogh or stems with thorns, art galleries in romantic cities where she is headed, but you should not go. And the flight attendant grazes my shoulder. The crossword squares, the letters, the chairs and aisles seem so tight in flight, but there is nothing here but room, really. Maybe the next passenger will know what I do not. 64 down, 5 letters, purpose. And why do we remember what we do? We know the buzz of Dickinson's Fly and the number of years in Marquez's Solitude, but some things we will never know, as it should be. Why the body sometimes rumbles like a plane hurtling over southern Oregon. How exactly we fall in love, or if Frida and Maxine Hong Kingston would have loved the same kind of tea. Okay. So let's see. I don't know what to read. I'll just read one more, I guess. Hmm. I guess I'll read. This is sort of a shorter poem. Yeah, I'll read this poem. This is a poem titled Exile. And maybe I'll just say, I've never thought about this, but you're getting me thinking about this, Monica. Just with what I read as a real intention with poetry and how you run, um, or how you curate and make people feel welcome. I feel like poetry has a way of reducing distance
Mm.
or creating connection or community as you're doing in Belmont and now wherever people are. So this poem, I really was thinking about distance and um, things like that. So this is titled Exile. Our natural state is not defensive or tense, but water in a resting state. We state this to be true in an age of inquiry, our failure to put what is just before ease. There are lovers in another country reclining by a fire, admitting love in a common language with faith in the exiles of their state, where a woman looks at her friend and says, please put down your bag and stay. Please stay to see how the movie ends. Take my hand. I think the city might go up in flames.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for those kind words and also reminding us of the community coming together and I think that's what I have heard in you say in the past, which struck a chord with me, is that the idea is to encourage people to see poetry and the arts as inextricably intertwined with the civic fabric of where they live, and you do that with such ease and such effortlessness. And I'll come to my question in a bit, just taking the longer route here, but I want to address this thought that with the difficult times we are facing, socially, politically, and environmentally, those words feel especially resonant, and they remind us that poetry and the arts aren't just reflective practices, but active forces that can shape, challenge, and really heal the communities we are part of. And as artists, writers, and cultural workers, many of us find ourselves in a moment of both urgency and hope, and a time where activism and advocacy are being revitalized with fresh energy. I think as poets serving the community, we are really being called to ask deeper questions about our roles, our responsibilities, and the ethical frameworks that guide our work, especially in the realm of art and literature, which can so powerfully influence hearts and minds. It becomes, I think, all the more crucial uh, to reflect on how we show up and for whom and why. And in your role as California's Poet Laureate, you've traveled across regions and engaged with diverse communities. So I'm curious that in this time of renewed activism, as a literary advocate and ambassador for poetry and the arts, how do you stay grounded in these considerations? And what questions do you ask yourself that maybe guide your reflection on your role and its impact on those you aim to uplift?
Yeah. Well, you touched on a lot of concerns, I think, on a lot of people's minds in this current moment. And in my time as California Poet Laureate, the word I often return to time and time again is just how expansive it has been.
Mm,
Um, I like to mention these numbers I've become familiar with. So California is around 39 million people. It's about 9 or 10 million more than the next most populous state, which is Texas. One of
mm,
my favorite numbers is that about 1 out of every 4 Californians was born outside of the United States. And so I've traveled every corner of this state over the last couple of years and in between. It's been incredibly uplifting to see, not just the cities where there are really notable festivals or robust reading series or things like that, but tiny little towns. There have been
mm,
a couple I had not heard of, and 1,000 people or 2,000 people, and 50 of them will come out to a poetry reading
mm,
because I think at any time and at any place, even a child wants to create, and they have a story in their minds, even before a 3-year-old can draw something that resembles a house or a dog. They might scratch something out that has 8 legs and eyes over here, but if you ask them what it's about, they'll have a story. Oh, that's, you know. Um, I feel like with activism and when it translates into that sort of the artist and the responsibility and things like that, um, I'm a very amateur student of history. Um, One of my favorite books is The Universal History of the Destruction of Books, which is a research book, but it's also anecdotal about how different dictatorships and uh, governments, when they fell or when they were imperial, they would often go after the country's literature. In other words, something a lot of people probably know, it's often the country's intellectuals and the artists who are deemed most dangerous. They might be mocked and dismissed as sitting out by the river counting the leaves on a tree, but the
mm,
state, if it's concentrated in its power and concerned about other people having access,
mm,
other people getting educated, other people gaining financial stability. I don't think it's that far of a leap to see why certain books are banned
mm,
or why cultural programs are threatened or cut. Um, in terms of showing up, I think any teacher is doing work already. I think poets are often doing the work. And I could go on, and I hope I'm speaking to your question a little bit, but I do want to say one thing about just protesting and things like that. And that is just that can take a lot of different forms.
mm.
It saddens me when someone goes out and protests and they get angry at somebody who doesn't. There are
Right.
a lot of reasons why somebody might not be able to. One is it's a luxury of time to be able to go spend 5 hours. Somebody might be working 3 jobs, or somebody might be undocumented or have other very legitimate concerns. So I think it's important to be
Absolutely.
smart and also to keep the big picture in mind. And just remember there are a lot of different ways that people can try to do that work on their own time. Sometimes
Mm,
it's invisible to most people. They might just sort of respectfully disagree with a family member and open up a conversation. That's activism to me. So I think it takes all different forms, whether a person has got a big platform or not, that we all can do our part when we can, however we can.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee, for sharing that and really bringing us into that state of mind, I think. And I think it would be perfect. I have one final question for you before we close the conversation. But before that, I have a request. If I know you were reading the final piece there, but if you could offer us My California once again, I would love to hear your recitation of that. It's a piece that I keep returning to, and I'm sure so many of our audience members have read that and heard that piece, but it would be a joy to hear it again.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. And it's fitting what we were just talking about.
Exactly.
This was written at a time when I was starting to feel like, I have things to say too about my state and what I would like to see. So this is My California. Here, an olive votive keeps the sunset lit, and the Korean 20-somethings talk about hyphens, graduate school, and good pot. And a group of four at a window table in Carpinteria discuss the quality of wines in Napa Valley versus Lodi. Here in My California, the streets remember the Chicano poet whose songs still bank off Fresno's beer-soaked gutters and almond trees in partial blossom. Here in My California, we fish out long noodles from the pho with such accuracy you'd know we'd done this before. In Fresno, the bullets tire of themselves and begin to pray 5 times a day. In Fresno, we hope for less of the police state and more of a state of grace. In My California, you can watch the sun go down like in your California. On the ledge of the pregnant 22nd century, the one with a bounty of peaches and grapes, red onions, and the good salsa, wine and japchae. Here in My California, paperbacks are free. Farmers markets are 24 hours a day and always packed. The trees and water have no nails in them. The priests eat well. The homeless eat well. Here in My California, everywhere is Chinatown. Everywhere is K-Town. Everywhere is Armenia Town. Everywhere, a little Italy. Less Confederacy. No internment in the valley. Better history texts for the juniors. In My California, free sounds and free touch, free questions, free answers, free songs from parents and poets, those hopeful bodies of light.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Lee. These are, I think, such marvelous poems, and especially when each time I hear My California, I feel it is such an exquisite celebration of voices and stories, and I love how you you truly embrace everything about the place and your home, and even with all its flaws or things that we don't like, you really the poem really teaches us to embrace all of it together. And I love how you read the piece always, every time, with so much love and passion and care. And I think about Fresno, it has such a rich literary heritage, the city itself, and it has such a vibrant poetry space and scene also. There is a joke that goes around that there's something in the waters of Fresno that makes all the Fresno poets so amazing. And coming to my question, the final question I have for you is, I was thinking of Philip Levine, also a Fresno poet and the former US poet laureate and a longtime teacher at Fresno State, who once said that And he said that he often gave this same advice to young poets who asked, how am I going to make it? And his answer was simple but profound. And he said, do it the hard way, and you will always feel good about yourself. You write because you have to, and you get this unbelievable satisfaction from doing it well. Try to live on that as long as you're able. And I
Yep.
think that that spirit of commitment of to craft and integrity of purpose seems to echo in your own teaching journey as well, having taught English and poetry at Fresno City College for over 25 years, is it?
Hmm.
And even having led workshops in high schools as well, you've had a front row seat to the ways young poets encounter and shape the art form. And in all of those years of guiding young writers, and even now as you interact with young writers, what are some of the most striking or thought-provoking insights you've gathered about the ways young people relate to poetry, and what that reveals about the art form's enduring potential?
Mm, boy, these questions are kind of artful in themselves. So this one comes to mind, Monica. Um, I mean, it, it's it's going to take me some time to try to make sense of what I've seen.
Mm,
And with high school students or young writers, so many come to mind. The first one that popped into my head was in Los Angeles. I was one of the judges for the Get Lit Classic Slam.
mm,
And there was a high school student who read a poem about some of the Asian Americans who were shot at their family's dance studio.
mm,
And it was one of the most moving things I've read or heard recently. Um, I emceed the state finals for Poetry Out Loud about a month ago in Sacramento, which is a high school recitation contest of poetry. And I think one thing I notice is just sort of the visceral emotion that young writers bring to a poem. It might be because the experience is early or new or striking to them. I mean, I hope that we never are um, unmoved by a mass shooting. I hope we're
mm,
never uh, numb to whether it's a Sandra Bland or Eric Garner or Tamir Rice or any other of the approximately 1,000 people that are killed in this country by the police every year, or whatever it might be, poverty.
mm,
But with young people, I think there's a combination of freshness and energy and
mm,
emotion that I find um, wonderful and necessary. And to the second part of your question, how does it relate to what is enduring about poetry? These are the things that have kept and will continue to keep poetry going, despite the New York Times article every 5 years, can poetry matter? Of course it
mm,
will matter. Um, I know all the technology concerns us, but um, like one actor said recently to somebody else with regard to the technology, yes, but can a machine or can a computer ever miss someone? So I think
mm,
it's not going anywhere. I mean, laureate ships, all the poets of all ages. I've loved working also, we're talking about young folks. I've done a lot of work, and I'm going to the Azusa Senior Center in a couple of weeks. And there's a robust poetry community of all ages, the CSU Ollie programs or the work you're doing. It's alive and well.
That's beautifully put, Lee. And absolutely, I couldn't agree more to so many of those things that you brought to light. Thank you so much. Your students are so lucky to have you. And as we conclude this conversation, I want to say how much your work continues to inspire communities and spark reflection and dialogue and really has deepened understanding. And I want to thank you for all the wisdom you shared with us tonight through your words. But we are not quite at the end of our program yet. There's still a little more to come. And in place of an open mic, we have a special offering. So we have some more to share and experience together. And Lee, I'm particularly grateful for this, that you graciously accepted the invitation to be part of a special offering that I envisioned, kind of like a project that aligns so beautifully with tonight's poetry night. And it's a true honor to have you contribute to this meaningful experience. So just to let everyone know, I'd like to say that this is a moment not just to engage as audience members, but as co-creators to bring your voice into the conversation with our state poet laureate's work. So, as part of this National Poetry Month special, Lee and I are extending an open invitation to all attendees to listen, reflect, and create. Lee would grace us with one more poem of his, How Music Stays in the Body, a piece that resonates deeply with themes of hope and healing and resilience. And we invite you to listen deeply, find inspiration as you reflect on it, and create your own poetic response. And it's not supposed to be instantaneous. You will have time until the end of this month, in fact, which is April 30th, to send in your poem in response to me. And submissions can be emailed to me. And as part of this creative exchange, selected response poems will be published online uh, on my Laureate initiative, which is Project Poetry 360, which has been going on through my tenure. And I'll be including two files in the chat. One would be the featured poem. The other document would be the submission details and guidelines. So please keep an eye out on them in the chat and make sure you download both those files. Yes, to the question in the chat, this will be on YouTube as well. So if you'd like a link to the YouTube recording of this program, please feel free to email me. My email will be on the submission guidelines document. So yeah, as I go ahead and share those pieces, I will also have the visual of the poem in front of us right now. So as Lee recites the poem to us, you will have the text in front of you as well. All right, Lee, I'll let you take the lead now, and I'll share a visual of the poem whenever you're ready. And if you'd like to say something about the poem before or after as a guiding thread for all our participants, potential participants, please do the needful. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Monica. And, I'll just say briefly about the poem that it's a poem that's, yeah, I think of it as a love song for my Korean birth mother, whom I've never met. And it also turned out to be a love song for adoptees everywhere. So I'll read the poem, and I'm so honored that some of you might write in response to it, and how wonderful, Monica, that you're going to be publishing them. Um, and the only thing I'll say is that if you do it, I just encourage you to make your poem your own. It doesn't have to be about adoption or even a parent. Maybe it's about the body, or maybe it's about some line that speaks to you and you go off in your own direction. But having said that, I'll go ahead and read the poem. Should I read the poem? Yeah. Okay. So the poem is titled How Music Stays in the Body. Your song, excuse me, your body is a song called Birth or First Mother, a miracle that gave birth to another exquisite song. One song raises three boys with a white husband. One song fought an American war overseas. One song leapt from 14 stories high and like a dead bird shattered into the clouds. Most forgot the lyrics to their own bodies or decided to paint abstracts of mountains or moons in the shape of your face. I've been told mothers don't forget the body. I can't remember your face, the shape, or story, or how you held me the day I was born, so I wrote 1,000 poems to survive. I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar. I want to hear your opinions about angels. Truth is, angels drink too. Soju spilled on the halo, white wings sticky with gin, as if any mother could forget the music that left her. You should hear how loudly I sing now. I've become a ballad of wild dreams and coping mechanisms. I can breathe now through any fire. I imagine I got this from him or you, my earthly inheritance. Your arms, your sigh, your heavy song. I know all the lyrics. I know all the blood. I know why angels howl into the moonlight. So, yeah, this was one of those poems that was hard to write, but sometimes those can be the most meaningful ultimately. I would say I'll also add if you do write about something heavier,
Mhm.
I'm a big believer in self-care. So if you need to step away, if you need to take your time, you know, trust yourself. But if you are thinking about writing something heavier or something like this, and you can, you know, calibrate your emotions and be okay, I do encourage you to try it if you're wanting to. Um, but I hope you enjoy wherever you go with it, whatever you do. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. I'll just stop sharing my screen now. I'll just take a moment. That was such a beautiful recitation, Lee. And I've always enjoyed this poem online, but listening to you read that piece really brings to life so many aspects of it. So thank you again. And I especially love the way in which the title of your poem echoes throughout the piece, how you circle back to it even as you close, when you say, I know all the lyrics, I know all the blood. So I really enjoy how the title and the body of the poem really work with each other. How music stays in the body. You really hold on to that thought, and it's so fitting, despite its emotional weight and exploration of personal loss and grief. I feel that this poem invites a truly profound response and opens up space for artistic expression. So. Uh, with that, I really hope that all of you find a connection in this emotionally rich piece, whether your poem is a reflection, a question, a parallel story, or a spontaneous spark. We hope that you feel encouraged to be a part of this offering and send in your poem in response. Once again, please download the submission files from the chat before you exit the Zoom room. And if you're unable to, for some reason, please send me an email request to remind me, and I'll email you those files back to you. And if there are any queries, I'll take them at the end of our program once we stop recording. But thank you so much, Lee. This has really been such an enriching experience and a moment of pure joy. And I'd like to echo your own words. You said somewhere that joy is its own kind of way and its own kind of fuel. So we really, I want to thank you for bringing that joy to all of us and reminding of us of that joy and for carrying it through your poetry and your presence and your generous spirit tonight. I'm deeply honored to have you and to hold this space with you. But we have some time for audience interaction, uh, just a few more minutes, and I'd love to offer everyone a chance to share thoughts and their gratitude or any questions you may have for our featured guest here. So please keep your comments brief so we can hear from as many voices as possible, but feel free to unmute yourself one at a time. And yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I just wanted to quickly say, Lee, that your reading and sharing of your thoughts and your work was profound and inspiring. And I especially found value in what you said about we don't have to have the answers, that it's called creative writing, and we can explore and invent from that. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's a good reminder, you know. Thank you. I'll have good energies for your writing.
Louise, please go ahead.
So
Yeah, Louise.
wonderful evening, Lee. And I wanted you to know that last night at Sacred Grounds, the theme was revolution. And I read 5 of your poems, and people were so touched and inspired by them. I read Decomposition, Manifesto, Flags, Testimony, and I got a letter from the government the other day. And what I noticed, I mean, I was just really delighted to be enveloped in your words. And what I noticed was that the first line in every poem in your book, it just invites you in. And I'd like to know if you study the first line, if the first line comes to you, or if you revise to the first line. And thank you for your answer.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for reading my poems. That just makes my heart very happy. And I love that you chose, and maybe it was to the theme, those poems have a good bit of fire in them. You know, each of them is political in some different way. With opening lines, it's one of my favorite things in any kind of literature is just opening lines. You know, I've still got, one of my all-time favorites is from a novel, actually, Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, which is kind of related to our present moment, which was about the book burning and things. But the opening line of that novel is, uh, "It was a pleasure to burn." I love opening lines. So I do like opening lines that make a declaration, you know. Um, your body is a song called Birth or First Mother. Just these declarations. Um, um, Something that lets you know right off the way, right out of the gate that you're in it and we're rolling. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but it does have to be immediate. And so it's a wonderful question. They're difficult, but I just love reading anything where right off the bat I'm taken or I'm moved or I'm thinking something that I didn't think before. Thank you.
Thank you. was a pleasure to read them and share. The people
Oh,
really appreciated your work.
thank you, Lillian.
Oh, my other question is, do you ever teach classes on Zoom?
Um, every once in a while. I don't regularly. Um, my time sometimes is hard with my schedule, but I will say that I'm contemplating after retirement from my teaching job, which is not that far down the road. I am contemplating teaching online classes, so um, we'll see. Yeah.
Yes, Phyllis, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So Lee, thank you so much. I was actually out at dinner and I managed to turn on my little phone and you were speaking to us and serenading us as we ate our dinner. Um, and I I I your poems about adoption are just so touching and moving to me. It's so poignant and so beautiful. I think that's one of the things that I believe in so much is to take something so difficult and make it beautiful. And just hearing a number of them together, I love that that whole book is really focused on that. I'm just constantly thinking about how people put books together and how you figure out what your book is going to have in it. So just along that note, I wanted to ask you if well, there's two poets, and I'm so sorry I can't remember the last name of one of them, but Bun Kang Tuan, he's a Cambodian American poet who writes about being part of the oh gosh, the genocide in Cambodia, and then he came over here, and I'm I can't remember if he was adopted, but anyway, I just thought that you might want to check some of his work out. And
Mm,
also another Greg, I'm sorry, I can't remember his last
mm,
name, but who they read together. They often read together.
mm. I wonder if if it's the same one I'm thinking of. I know a Greg Santos,
Yes,
yes, he's adopted. Um,
yes, that's
yeah,
right. Yes.
yeah, I think there are many literatures and
Hmm.
bodies of poems coming out of all different kinds of communities, and the adoption community is one of them, which is
Hmm.
really fascinating and and affirming to see
Hmm.
because um, the Cambodian genocide in say the mid to late 1970s
Hmm.
that eradicated about 20% of Cambodia's population at the time.
Hmm.
And to see poets or people writing about it is indeed beautiful out of that experience. But to something you said earlier, you know, you know what I find beautiful? This, and I, at the risk of sounding trite, and I hope this doesn't sound
You go for it.
trite. Thank you. But I'm going to say it anyway. One of the things I love most, just in general, not even with poetry, is just seeing people make it through,
Yeah.
whatever it is. I love
Yeah.
seeing or hearing or learning about people who survived something or made it through something. Um,
Uh,
Deeply moving and inspiring for me.
well, yeah, I mean, I often, I'll just cut it short in a minute, but I often wonder, like, why am I writing about these really hard things, and who really cares? Like it's like it's your journey, and why do you put it out there? But I think what you're saying is why is it's really helpful to me to think about that. That's
Absolutely.
why. That is why, because you
Absolutely.
made it and you're here to tell about it. And other people, they've made it too. We've all made it in
Absolutely.
some way. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's priceless. So
And
keep
just
on.
one more thing I want to say. So
Sure.
Ben Kong, I don't know if Greg Santos has kids. I don't think he does, but Ben Kong has at least one child.
Hmm.
And a lot of what he writes about is that child and how the healing that came from having a kid who he has raised to be a healthy child in the face of the trauma, the terrible trauma that he had as a kid.
Mhm.
And so when you write a little bit about your daughter, it kind of touched me in that same way. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mary Marcia, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Very quickly, I want to thank you as an adopted that you put me in touch again with the wonder, how yearning it feels when you don't know anything about who they are and who you are in that thing, where you're kind of looking in the mirror to see what they might look like and and it's very beautiful. It put me back in touch with how I felt so long ago after having come through and went the journey to find uh, my birth parents. I loved your first parent. That is so good. First mother, first.
Hmm.
I love that because
Oh.
it feels awkward because I loved my adopted parents too.
Mhm.
And many interpreted finding them as being a rejection of
Mhm.
them, which it wasn't.
Mhm.
You know, it was more, I don't know, a strong feeling that I had to do this
Mhm.
when I was really young, actually, around 4 or 5,
Mhm.
when I didn't really know how you do those things, but I thought
Mhm.
I could go back.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. One of the things I've felt very grateful for is meeting other adopted folks. Even though each of our stories is singular, there's also a commonality that we share.
yeah.
And you know, when you say that, and it's a common experience where an adopted person wants to find those roots or they have questions,
Mhm.
it always saddens me when the adoptive parents are threatened by that. Um, I have a dear friend, one of my closest friends of over 50 years, about 50 years. Um, and he asked me once why so many adoptees want to do that. And what I said to him was, well, imagine you are, let's say, white, or choose your ethnicity or race, and then you're adopted to some completely other state, or in my case, country, let's say like the Sudan, and you grow up Sudanese. You're fluent in Sudanese. You know the jokes, the history, the language. To think that that person someday isn't going to wonder about Kansas or wherever they were born, to me, defies logic. Um, it's a powerful thing, and I'm happy for you. I send you all my good energies. Um, you know, there's a great website with which you might already be familiar, but if anybody listening is interested, they're wonderful writers. They also happen to be adopted authors on a website called adopteereading.com, where there are all genres, all
Okay.
subjects, some wonderful some books. But thank you, and it's nice to meet you.
My thanks to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you once again, Lee. Huge gratitude to you for giving us so much in this entire hour and a half that we had with you, and given your incredibly full schedule as the state poet laureate, I understand how demanding it is, but it's a privilege to have your voice and vision be a part of this virtual gathering in such an inspiring and truly healing way. So I'm really grateful to have you with us. And once again, it was an honor to host you and be in conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. An honor to be with you. Truly. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot. With that, we are going to stop recording now. Those of you who are still in the Zoom room, please feel free to stay online for a moment if you have any questions or just want to say goodbyes. But to our YouTube audience, thanks for joining in and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.